Getting notifications. Hi everyone, welcome to the sewing basket, our Wise Guy Wednesday video. Today is October 7th, 2020. I'm here today. I've kind of been missing in action for a while. Our oldest son got married 2 weeks ago, so I've kind of been busy with kids being home and animals in my house and getting ready for things, and so moving my daughter from Tennessee to Dallas. So there's just been a lot going on in my life, but they're all gone. The house is empty. The cat is happy because all the dogs are gone, and we're getting back to normal at work here too. So today we're going to do the last of our three-part series in Quilt As You Go projects. So what I have behind me is going to be a simple little table runner working with a strip set, and our two samples, we've cut our strip set into either 6-inch sections or 3-inch sections. Okay, so I'm just going to go through some of the steps that we take to put this project together. So the first thing you're going to do is you need to make your strip set. So we work with a 9-inch piece, a 6.5-inch piece, and a 3-inch piece. And we're just going to sew them into one long strip. Now one thing is for these two sizes, 6 inches or 3 inches, you need to have 42 inches of cuttable fabric in your strip set. So if you look here, you can see different manufacturers, they're all different lengths. So before you start cutting, you want to make sure that your shortest piece, you're still going to have 42 inches to cut your pieces up. If you have a little less than that, you can make your pieces slightly smaller. If you need to straighten things up as you're going and you're running out and that last piece is going to be 5 3/4 instead of 6 inches. Would it matter? Probably not. It's a table runner. Again, we're not curing cancer here, we're making a table runner. So if one of my little strips is 1/4 inch smaller, I'm okay with that. All right. So once we have our strip set made, we need to cut it up into our sections. And again, for our samples, we did either 3-inch or 6-inch. If you want, you could do 4 inches, 5 inches. It really doesn't matter. If your design fits better into a certain size, go ahead and do that. Again, you're just going to have to, you'll get different amounts depending upon your strip length. Couple tips when I'm cutting is you want to make sure that you keep your strips as straight as possible. So if I'm going to be cutting this into my 3-inch sections, obviously I'm going to lay my 3-inch line along my edge, but then to make sure that my ruler isn't twisted a little bit, I'm going to find one of my lines on the ruler and I'm going to lay that line even with my center seam so that I have 2 points of reference for my cutting. So I'm going to have that center line lined up with my center seam, and then I'm going to make sure that my 3-inch is lined up along my side. And I'm just going to cut a couple of them to use in my demonstration. And as you're going, if you feel that your strips are getting a little crooked, that you can't keep that center line straight with the perpendicular here, you can trim a little bit off and keep going. I did trim a little off the end of that first strip before I started the demonstration. Okay. And then I'm also going to cut 1 or 2 6-inch strips. So again, placing my 6-inch line along the edge and verifying that I'm straight with one of my other lines on the ruler, going down that center seam. And I'm going to cut one more. All right, and I'm just going to set this aside for now. And the reason I cut 2 different sizes is there's a little bit difference you have to do when you're laying them out on your batting and backing. So for your starting piece. So once I have all my strips cut, I need to take my backing, because remember this is a quilt as you go. So we're going to be dealing with our backing and our batting. So I've already fused my batting onto my backing. We like to work with the fusible battings. However, if you don't have one at home or access to it, you can use a 505 spray. You can use the, Elaine, what's the powder? The free fuse powder.
Select.
Right, from Quilter Select, the free fuse powder. You could use pins, but you just want to have this centered on your backing fabric. And then once I have my batting attached to my back, you need to draw 2 lines. Okay, so this line is going to be right down the center of my batting. And then I want to be careful when I draw my horizontal line that I keep it as straight as possible. So going back to that old school where measure and mark in 3 spots, and then connect those dots so that your line doesn't get crooked, because if your line is growing crooked, then your runner is going to be crooked as you go. Okay, so I'm going to get my vertical line and my horizontal line centered on my batting. So now to do my quilt as you go, and if we're starting with the 3-inch pieces, so from my strip set you can cut 14 3-inch pieces. So that means that I'm going to have 7 pieces to the left of my line and 7 pieces to the right of my line. So therefore when I start, my first one is going to be face up, and I want to lay it right on the line. Okay, so I'm going to line up the edge of my first piece with that vertical line. Then I'm going to take my second piece, I'm going to rotate it so that my 3-inch small piece is on opposite ends, and I'm going to put it right sides together. Okay, and then I'm going to sew my seam. I'm going to open it up, and if you want, you can use an iron, you can use a little press and roll, whatever method you like to use at your sewing machine if that's convenient. Okay, then we're going to pretend like this one is staying there. We're going to take my third one. Again, I'm going to rotate it so my small pieces are opposite. I'm going to lay it right sides together, sew it, flip it. So I'm just going to keep continuing until I fill up or do half of my pieces. You're actually going to be not all the way to the end. When I fuse this down, you do want to leave a little bit of it unfused so we can trim it at the end. Okay, so I'm going to fill up one side, and then I'm going to go back. This would have been my original piece. Then I'm going to start putting one here, sewing it, and opening it up. So it's pretty basic. You're just filling up your batting. Okay, but remember when you're working with your 3-inch piece, you're going to start right on the line. And anytime, even if it's not a 3-inch piece, anytime you have an even amount of strips, if I have 12 strips, I'm going to have 6 on either side of the line. This was 14 strips, so if I have an even number of strips, I'm going to have the same amount on either side, so I start right on the line. Okay, when I go to my 6-inch strips, again up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? 6 times 7 is 42. That was the length of my strip set. So I'm going to have my center piece, which when I start now, I need to center that on my line. I can't have it all the way to the right or left, because then I would have 4 and 3. So if you have an odd number of strips, you need to place that first strip on the center of your marked vertical line. And then I'm going to continue, and for this size, I'm going to sew 3 to the left and 3 to the right. Again, flipping each one each time. Right sides together, sew it, iron it open. Okay, so that makes sense. Again, if I want these to be 4-inch strips, I can have them be 4-inch strips. If I wanted to cut 2 different sizes, I could say I'm going to put my 6-inch strip, and then I'm going to add a 3-inch strip to either side, and then I'm going to add a 6-inch strip to either side. I could do something like that. It's really up to you. It's very flexible. You can do whatever you want. All right. The one thing to remember is when I only had 7 strips, that meant I only had 6 seams. So each seam is a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I lost 3 inches total from my 42 inch strip set. I lost 3 inches to the finish. When I had 14 strips, that means I lost 13 seams, which is 6.5 inches. So just because of all these extra seams, this table runner is going to be at least 3 inches smaller than this table runner. So it's just something to think about. Your final project, the more seams you have, the smaller it's going to be. Yep.
One comment, when she said a 1/2 inch seam on that top, she meant a 1/4 inch on each side equals a 1/2 inch short, and it is sewn with a 1/4 inch seam allowance.
Sorry, yeah. A 1/4 inch off of here and a 1/4 inch off of here gives me a 1/2 inch that I'm missing off of that seam, not 1/2 inch seam allowance total, okay? If I wanted to do the smaller pieces but I needed it to be longer, obviously I could just make 2 strip sets. I can sew 2 backing pieces together to make it longer, okay? But you just have to remember, the more seams you have, the smaller your project becomes, just because of the loss of the seam allowance. All right, so once I have my batting filled up with my strips, I'm ready to, because this one, the back gets rolled over to create your binding. So let me just grab a different sample. Okay. So this is one I've already prepped. It's all sewn together. And the first thing I had to do was trim any extra batting off. And the scissors right there. Okay. Is there? No, right there. Oops.
There you go.
Thanks. So again, this is why you left that last 2 inches kind of unfused, or you have to pull it back a little bit. So I'm just going to trim the batting even with the strip set. I want to be careful not to cut my back. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can just hand cut it. You really don't want to try to use a rotary cutter, because chances are you're going to cut into that backing, okay? And then, as you can see here, I've already trimmed these to 1 inch wider than where my piece stopped. And yep, is there a little spot where my batting is still showing? That's fine. This is going to wrap around and cover that up. So as you're adding these strips, if things are up and down a little bit, that's perfectly fine. Before I go on, I want to say one more thing I forgot to say. When you are adding these strips, in order to make sure that things are staying straight, okay, I want to try to keep that center seam in line with my horizontal line, okay? So for this 6 inch piece, I centered it here, but I also want to make sure that I'm not going crooked against that horizontal line. So then when I added my next one, and when I sew it, I'm going to nest my 2 little intersections here. I'm going to sew it. When I open it, I want to double check, because I want to make sure that this seam is now landing as close as possible to that line. That's what's keeping you in check, to make sure things aren't going too far askew as you keep adding these pieces. Again, with the 6 inch one, I only had to add 3. But with this one, I needed to do 7 strips on either side of center, and things can keep getting worse if you don't keep them in check. So you try to keep this middle line lined up on that horizontal line that you drew on your batting, which is why it's important to try to keep that line as straight as possible. Otherwise, these might be straight, but if your line's crooked, you still think things are off, okay? All right. So once I have everything trimmed up, I still need to trim my 1 inch all the way around my batting. So again, backing. I'm going to flip it around. And just put my 1 inch line right along the edge. And again, I tend to like to double check with keeping one line going across the top and one line going across the bottom. I'm off a little bit here, but it'll be okay because it'll still be within my seam allowance. All right. And then to finish this, it's going to be exactly like Elaine showed you 2 weeks ago, where you're going to take this edge, you're going to fold it in so it meets up to where your batting and top are, and then you're just going to fold it up again, and you're going to top stitch around that outer edge.
Can you show us that fold one more time?
Okay, so you're going to fold it down to, actually you want me to do it on the bottom edge? Will that be easier?
Right where you were on that blue.
Fold it down so that it butts right up to where your batting and your top piecing were.
Do it on the blue piece. Right
Okay.
there. Thank you.
Fold it down and then fold it up over your edge. Gives you a little bit more than a 1/4 inch fold. It's about 3/8 of an inch. And then whether it's a straight stitch or decorative stitch, you're just going to stitch down one side. You're going to do the same on the bottom. Fold it up, stitch across it, and then you'll come and finish your 2 ends. All right. Now, one other thing to remember, this is a table runner, but if you think of it, one row of any quilt can be a table runner, and a whole bunch of table runners sewn together can be a quilt, right? It's just a row. So if I made it a little bit longer, if I had this back be the size that I wanted a finished lap quilt to be, and I made a whole bunch of these rows, I can do what Elaine did last week or 2 weeks ago, where she then put her 2 rows back sides together, because this is that same 1 inch seam allowance that I just cut off of here. Put your back sides together, sewed across it, and then rolled one side to down and one side up. Okay, so I could make a small lap quilt or a baby quilt just by putting several different rows together of this same design. All right, hope that makes sense to everybody. I'm glad to be back, glad to be doing videos for you guys again. And we got hopefully a bunch of stuff coming in this week, so maybe later on Friday or so, Elaine will have another little preview of walking around and showing you everything that has come in. Until then, we'll see you later. Bye.